Hello everyone and welcome to the fourth in our webinars within the Vision series. Today's topic is future readiness, and I'm really delighted to welcome Rohit Talwar to tell us his views on this today. Rohit is the CEO of Fast Futures, an organisation that keeps its eye on the future, looking particularly perhaps at the impact of technology, but not so much on how that's going to impact organisations, but a big focus on the individual and how new ways of working enable us to unleash the potential within the individual. So really happy to welcome you, as I say, and looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And as you just heard, my role is really for the next 30 minutes to take you on a bit of a tour of what being a future-ready leader means. And one of the reasons I'm here is that I work with organizations through executive education, keynote speaking, consulting, and our publishing about the future. And our forthcoming book is actually a Future Leaders Handbook, so we'll be drawing on some of that content to share with you. And today what we're really going to talk about is one of the dimensions of the 5 which the Institute of Leadership and Management focuses on. These are 5 dynamic dimensions, as you know, and one of them is about vision, which has multiple elements in the ILM model, one of which is future readiness. And future readiness is really all about making sure that we're developing visionary leaders who are capable of scanning the horizon, seeing what's coming next, and using the insights to make better decisions today, to help our organizations prepare for and deliver change, and to encourage people to be part of that process of envisaging and creating the future. And really, a future-ready leader is someone who's capable of that horizon scanning, looking over the horizon 1, 3, 5 years out to see what might be coming, the trends, the driving forces, the ideas, the developments, and what we might call weak signals of emerging change that could help us make better decisions today. And we're looking in an increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, continuously changing and ambiguous world. We're looking in particular at some key dimensions. So political and economic change, socio-demographic change, how the behavior of our customers might evolve, how they might use information to change the way they want to do business with us. And of course, every business now is becoming about the way it uses technology and the way it uses its data, not just to do its work, but to really embed the work it does in the technology and to become a digital organization. And so there are a number of characteristics that we can see here that are critical to those who aspire to being future-ready leaders. And really the core of these is about that capacity to let go of the ideas and the assumptions and the worldviews that may have served us up to now and be willing to be flexible and agile and creative about what we do next to respond to the ideas, the opportunities, the challenges we see coming over the horizon. It's also important here to have the capacity to analyze and interpret those signals of change that are coming to us and to be able to inspire people to take radical action that might be fundamentally different to that which we're doing today, and to take a course of action that where we don't necessarily have the data yet to say it's the right course, but we can see the opportunity and we have to do bold experiments to learn our way into that future. And obviously, part of that then means the resilience to be able to withstand shocks, to cope with experiments that don't work, a willingness to drive the actions that will move us forward when we do see opportunities or challenges, and a tolerance of the fact that we are moving into a world where there's increasing risk and greater ambiguity. We can never have perfect information. And when we're talking about the future, we're only ever dealing with forecasts, assumptions, predictions. We don't have hard data on which to base our decisions. That's something that all future leaders have to get very good at. And really what we've seen is that the environment in which we're trying to lead has changed quite dramatically, where, as I was saying earlier, we're moving from organizations where, in a sense, we did whatever we did. We made cars, we ran supermarkets, we built houses, and we used technology as part of our business to support it, but it was always seen as a cost center. Now we're increasingly competing with a world of businesses who are, if you like, born digital. They don't see cars, they don't see houses, they don't see people. All they see is data. And their view is that if we can get the data for any sector or for any business, and we can master that data, then we can apply the algorithms we need to in order to deliver the right outcomes. And effectively, we can compete with anyone, however long they've been in their sector, because we have the data, and the data is the new oil, which drives economic value in the future. So the challenge for all our businesses is, how do we make that journey from doing stuff with digital to becoming truly digital and developing a digital mindset, truly understanding what it means to use these new technologies, particularly the ones that are emerging like AI and blockchain, cloud computing, the Internet of Things, big data, 5G comms, hyperconnectivity, all these things. I'm really trying to understand not only how the technologies work, but also what they make possible. We spend a lot of our time helping leaders go out and connect with new businesses who have a totally different business model to them, who see the world in a very different way, and who are turned on by the power of what combining artificial intelligence and big data enables for them, enabling us to do tasks that we could never have done as individuals in the past, enabling us to analyze the kind of swathes of information that we could only have dreamed of a few years ago. But that requires us to shift our mindset. It requires a new emotional frame of mind around the future, a willingness to overcome our fears, to try new ideas, to think fast, fail cheap, and to constantly experiment and try new behaviors and new ways of thinking that allow us to think and learn our way into the future. And so ILM have a nice model for this here, which really says the core of this is about having that motivational drive to really want to keep creating the next future for our organizations, and to take responsibility for trying to lead the organization into the future, a willingness to think quickly when we see the signs of change and opportunity or threat, and really working with our people through highly developed interpersonal skills to encourage them to act fast as well and not be barriers to change, or not to feel like they have to find a reason to block the change because they're scared of it. So what it means is the future ready leader is a constant change manager. And core to this then is developing the capacity for what we would call horizon scanning, spotting those trends that are coming over the horizon. And as I said earlier, we have the mega trends, those major forces that are really shaping the future of all of us. So for today, we might be talking about two-way globalization, where we're seeing China and India in particular globalizing into the markets that used to take businesses into those countries. We're seeing other major global trends, such as the relentless pace of technology innovation, the rise of consumer power, the growing importance of social media, demographic growth, and environmental uncertainty. Those are all mega trends and things that we need to factor into our analysis. And then we need to look at the more micro level trends, what's happening with specific technologies, when might they become commercially viable, what new ideas are coming through, what new kind of behaviors are we seeing in the marketplace, what new formats might we be seeing if you're in retail. And here we want to be looking at trends and forces, not just in the near term, not just what's happening out there today that we may not be paying attention to, but also looking out at the next year to see what might be coming that could help us. And then beyond that, looking at the next 1 to 3 years to say what might be coming that could help us drive innovation and growth. And finally, looking 4 to 10 years over the horizon at the ideas and developments that could be part of our future. What are the weak signals of possible change? What are the ideas that are in the laboratory today that we can't act on now, but that could be very powerful for the future? So one of those areas today is something called biocomputing, where people are looking at storing information on DNA and computing using bacteria. The first experiments have proved very exciting, and we could see those come to commercial fruition in 4 to 10 years' time. Similarly, in the food industry, 4 years ago, Mark Prost in his laboratory in Amsterdam created the world's first laboratory-grown hamburger. That cost about 325,000 euros and apparently wasn't very nice to eat. Last year, the same laboratory delivered that hamburger for just 11 euros. And now it tastes something like the beef you would get in a good fast food store. So wind the clock forward 2 to 4 years, and it's very likely that they'll have brought that cost down to about 50 cents and something that's very edible. So that could change the world of people in all sorts of parts of the food industry. So when we can see what's coming in the longer term, we can create some scenarios about how our world might pay out. And we can encourage all the people in our organization to be scanning for those trends and contributing to both the short term, the medium term, and the long term perspective. And with the long term perspective in particular, that 4 to 10 year horizon, what we really want to do is to create some scenarios to say, well, how might our world play out in that time frame? And then use the insights from those scenarios to drive our strategic decision making and our operational actions in the next 1 to 3 years to make sure that we're fit enough, flexible enough, and have a forward-looking mindset that will enable us to respond to whatever might happen in the longer term. So the trend scanning part, the horizon scanning part, is a critical part of the start of the process of looking to the future and making our organizations future ready. And what we're looking for when we're scanning are the patterns of change, if you like, of what's going on. So where are the people starting to converge things to create new products and services? So for example, today in retail, if you look online, there are a number of tools that let people see how a particular item of clothing might look with other recommended products. So you might choose a shirt or a blouse, and what the website will do is show you a whole range of other products, a jacket, a pair of trousers, shoes, accessories, a handbag, whatever that would go with that outfit. So they're bundling them together to say, here's a packaged offer for you that allows you to buy a complete outfit. The customer hopefully benefits because they get a look that works for them. And obviously the retailer benefits because they've upsold. Secondly, we're looking for what's the divergence in the market. Where are people breaking from the current trend and doing something significantly different? So one of the things we see is, again, let's take retail as an example that we'd all understand. We're seeing a growing trend towards retailers using more and more automation in the store. We've even seen stores like Hoynter where they've completely taken away the human staff and replaced them with robots. But then we're seeing at the other end of the spectrum people who are playing up the human element, where they have really well-trained staff who understand things like color matching so that they can advise customers in a very personalized way about what's right for them. We're also looking at things like cyclicality. When is something cycle coming to a natural end? Where might a new cycle just be about to start? So from at the moment, again, let's stick with the retail example. One of the cycles we're seeing a lot at the moment is the rise of retro shops, pop-up stores, in disused stores, in markets, even in department stores and in shopping centres. We're starting to see more and more of these retro stores offering us clothing from different eras, from the 40s, 50s, 60s, because there's a desire to go back to that feel, listen to the music of that era, wear the clothes of that era. Another topic to focus on is the idea of redirection. How do you respond to a trend that looks like it's going counter to your strategy? And our own business is a very good example of that, where we started as a publisher and we thought the way to go was to publish fairly large compendiums of ideas from across a range of different authors. Our first book was 560 pages plus. And what the market was telling us was that it wanted in-depth content, and it really wanted to have a spectrum of views. But then the feedback we got when people got the books was they loved the content, but actually could we make them much smaller? And could we share more of our own thinking? So we've now launched a series of books that are much shorter, that are our own thinking, that are delivered much faster. And we're seeing a growing desire to get books down from 500 pages to 200 to 80 pages. So we're, rather than fighting the trend and trying to have the marketplace do what we think is right, we're really riding the trend and getting people to use that. Reduction is a very interesting trend we're seeing across the market, where everyone is really challenging what their business should be doing and what they should be handing out to external players. So in our case, we hand out everything from typesetting, proofreading, copying, editing, and even cover design. We outsource all of those to players that we found via different websites or recommendations. So we have a very core business focus on the things that we do best, and we're seeing that more and more, so we can focus on our USP, which is the content, and allow others to do what they do really well. And you're seeing that more and more in every sector. And finally, this notion of acceleration. Where is it that we can really amplify one key feature of what we have to offer and add further benefits to that? And a good example of that is the VIP lanes that we see increasingly at entertainment parks like Disney, where once you buy the VIP package, people are not only allowing you faster access to rides, but they're adding in more and more benefits, whether it might be peak time reservations at restaurants that don't normally have them, the chance to meet characters, special offers while you're staying in the park. So really taking that one element and amplifying what we can do for you. So those are just some of the ideas about how we tap into future opportunity through our scanning and how we spot them. Now, part of scanning obviously is trying to understand whether something might have an impact. And there are two ways of doing that. A lot of people use forecasting techniques to say whether a trend is likely to develop into something, or scenario planning, where you combine multiple future factors, trends, weak signals, ideas, developments, mega trends. You combine them all into scenarios. Now, we're not going to have time to go through a full scenario planning structure here. There are many tools on the web that will enable you to get a good in-depth understanding. But basically, the key with scenario planning is to make sure that what you're creating is useful and doesn't become an exercise in creation, but actually serves the organization, is relevant, timely, usable, can be adapted, and really covers the key factors that might shape the operating environment you're in. So, and how the model typically works is we start by saying, well, why are we doing it? What's the purpose? What's the question we're trying to ask here? How far ahead do we want to look, and how do we intend to use it? Then we go on to the horizon scanning process, which I've talked about in some depth. That's a combination of desk research, scanning the internet, looking for the political, the economic, the scientific and technological, socio-demographic, legal, moral, ethical developments that could have a bearing, interviewing experts maybe on our sector and other sectors who can have an input, and questioning our own executives as to what their views are, but not just our executives, the broader staff, to get an input. What are they actually seeing in the marketplace from our suppliers, from our partners, from our customers? Then there's a scenario building process where we're building these stories about the future. These are not predictions. These are stories about how the future might play out, looking for multiple different stakeholder perspectives and asking a series of questions that are of real relevance to our organization. So what might be the critical features that customers are buying into in this market? How might they want to pay? What might be the channels to market? Where might new competition come from? Where might the potential shocks come from? So we're asking questions that will really help us make good strategic decisions. We wouldn't encourage people to create more than 3 or 4 scenarios. And typically what we'd suggest is you boil those down to maybe a couple that you work with. that are challenging. Rather than going with the one that looks nicest, go with a couple of challenging scenarios that force us to come up with alternative plans for how we might go to market, and really drive our strategy to push us into new spaces, go after new opportunities, and find creative ways of dealing with the challenges we might encounter. One thing that people like to do here is go beyond just creating the scenarios and actually put measures of risk around each of those so-called pestle variables that feed into the scenario. So we might identify the variables. So we might say level of GDP, we might say unemployment level, we might say penetration of technology into our customers are all key variables that will impact demand for our product and service. And then we'd look at the different ways those variables might play out, and we'd put a risk assessment against them to say, how likely is it that this will happen, and what is the risk or benefit to us of that particular development playing out? So we've covered quite a lot of territory here in exploring the future, why it's worth doing, why it drives future-ready leadership, how to engage the organization, the role of scanning, what we're looking for when we're scanning, and how to do scenario planning. But obviously people might want to go further. So there's a few resources here. There's also a booklet available from ILM. Sorry, I've just skipped forward a bit too fast, where you can find that. You can get hold of me if you have any questions about what I've talked about. The key thing here is using the future gazing process, if you like, using that approach of scanning the horizon and building scenarios as a core part of the way we do business, and being willing to do that on a continuous basis to drive decision making. So you might be scanning pretty much all the time in your organization and building scenarios once or twice a year to make sure you're constantly testing against the new ideas and developments that are coming through. So hopefully that's made sense and has given you a feel for the process of making your organization future ready. And I think we now have some time for questions. So I'm going to open it up, and I think Juliet is going to guide me on all this.
Right. Thank you, Rohit. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have a technical issue, and Kate is not able to join us. So I'm going to ask the questions. So we have some very interesting questions coming through from the audience. Someone is asking, how can I spot major trends in the next 5 years?
Well, that's the process of horizon scanning. So you would go out, and I don't know which sector you're in, but I would start by looking at sector-specific trends. So let's say you're in the water industry. I would literally put in some search terms that say water sector 2025, water sector 2020, and see what other people are saying, and search on trends, terms like key trends, key challenges, key scenarios for your sector, and see what comes up, and then do a broader scan on the kind of trends and developments that might be shaping the wider environment. And there you'll find a huge amount of data that you can tap into. So whether that's publications like Wired Magazine and Fast Company, which are good at broad scanning, Facebook groups like Futurism, and a number of other future-focused Facebook groups where people are constantly publishing new developments. It's a case of broad scanning. Twitter has some incredible content on it on a regular basis. So trying a range of different search terms to find political, economic, social, scientific, technological, legal, moral, and ethical trends and developments, but also sector-specific ones. And when people talk about the next 5 years, what we often find is they overestimate the time it will take for some developments to play out. So some of the things that you might say are 5 years away, you might actually find others are already doing. So I would take quite a broad perspective on what might be happening over the next 1 to 10 years, and then focus in on what you think you need to respond to in the next 5.
Right, thank you. So I suppose that the same applies in case I want to define the biggest threat to my company for, in the next 5 years out.
So there's two types of threats, aren't there? There's market-specific threats that are really relevant to your industry. So if I'm an oil company today, I want to know whether things like driverless vehicles, alternative energy present a threat to me, or are they new markets to get into? But then there are the broader threats, the macro risks to society, things like an economic downturn, political unrest, dangerous climate change. And again, there are different people who produce risk registers and risk scans of those emerging broad threats to society. And then you can also scan for your sector specific threats. And you want to look at a combination of both. And quite often what we would see as a threat is actually something where if we apply a different mindset to it, we see it as an opportunity to change the way we do business or enter the market in a different way. And you're seeing that now in financial services, where the fintech companies were originally seen as a threat, but now increasingly a lot of the big financial services companies are adopting those technologies, trying the new service offerings and trying new ways of working, inspired by what they previously saw as a threat.
Right, thank you. So we have one more question on scenario planning. In your experience, what are the biggest mistakes people make in scenario planning, and how do you mitigate this?
The first is people often want to see the scenarios as a forecast, which they're not. They're a story about a possible future. They're a good way of rehearsing the future in order to make better decisions today. If you don't set it up right, then people will misunderstand the purpose of it. Secondly, people want to get the right scenario, to find the one that's going to play out. The reality is the world is changing too fast to be able to find the actual scenario. No scenario is ever going to play out accurately. And thirdly, that we don't push ourselves far enough. We don't consider the most radical ideas. We don't look at options that really challenge our industry or challenge our business. And we want to look at scenarios that allow us to continue to exist, rather than ones that might threaten us and force us to take more creative and imaginative action. So those are three areas that I would say are common pitfalls for people when they're doing scenario planning.
Right. And what about innovation? Can you prepare for hyper innovation and rapid time to market? What do you think?
Well, the best way of preparing for them is to do them, and is to develop that muscle in your organization that learns how to accelerate the innovation process. And that means learning to do fast experiments, not doing endless business cases before you try something, but setting aside a budget for rapid experimentation with new ideas, involving your customers as early as possible in the design of the possible outcomes, testing it, refining it, and being willing to throw it away, and sharing the learning within the organization, and getting the conversation going across the business that says we have to innovate in order to succeed in the future. Doing nothing is not an alternative. And really starting to build that culture where it's okay to do experiments and to try new things and to not know what the outcome will be, and to be willing to throw things away if they don't work or they don't look like they'll be a commercial success. Because we can come up with great ideas, but if there's no, there might be a gap in the market, but if there's no money in the gap, then you probably won't want to do it. So it's a gene, if you like, it's a muscle we can build in the organization. And what we see is it takes 18 months to 2 years in traditional organizations to really shift the culture to become faster at innovation. I don't see many big mature companies becoming hyper innovative. The structure just doesn't allow for it. But often by partnering with smaller firms and setting up corporate venturing arms to invest in those hyper innovative companies, we can still get the benefits without totally disrupting the structure of our organization.
Right. Thank you, Rohit. I'm afraid we have run out of time. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar.